My father set a manila envelope on our kitchen table, right next to the sample wedding invitations Marcus and I had been comparing all morning, and said, "We just need 20,000 out of the wedding account. It's temporary." He said it the way he used to say "pass the salt." Casual, expecting no resistance. Like the $35,000 for $12 Marcus and I had spent 3 years saving wasn't a number I checked every Sunday night before bed. Marcus didn't even look up from the invitation samples at first. He just picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and said one word. "No." My father blinked like the word had never been spoken to him in that kitchen before. In 31 years, it hadn't. Not from anyone at that table. I sat frozen between them, staring at the envelope, because I already knew what was inside it before my father even reached to open it. I'd seen a folder just like it once before, 11 years earlier, the day he sat me down at 18 and told me to sign something just in case. I had no idea, sitting there with the invitation cardstock still in my hand, how much that old signature was about to matter again. Marcus and I met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue in Denver, over a shared complaint about undercooked burgers. And what people always say about him is true. He's steady in a way that made my chest unclench the first time we talked. I grew up the opposite of steady. My father, Gerald, ran a landscaping company out of our garage that never quite stopped being 6 months from turning the corner, and my mother, Diane, managed the books in a way that meant our family finances lived and died by whichever contract came in that quarter. Money in my house wasn't a number. It was weather, some seasons warm and generous, some seasons you didn't ask for anything at all. I started saving on my own at 19, working weekends at a plant nursery, putting every spare $20 bill into a savings account my father didn't know the balance of. There was something quietly satisfying about a number only I controlled. By the time Marcus and I got engaged, that account had turned into our joint wedding fund, $35,112 exactly, tracked in a shared spreadsheet Marcus updated every Friday night with the same nerdy consistency that made me fall for him in the first place. Green cells for what we'd saved, yellow for what was pending, a small running note at the bottom that just said on track. We picked a venue outside Boulder, a converted barn with string lights strung across the rafters, and we paid the deposit ourselves, in full. The week we got engaged, standing in the barn's empty loft, imagining where the tables would go. My parents came to dinner most Sundays. My mother would ask about flowers and dresses, genuinely warm about it, flipping through the same 3 bridal magazines she'd dog-eared for weeks. My father would ask, almost in passing, how the wedding budget was shaping up, like he was just making conversation over the pot roast. I didn't think much of it. Fathers ask about money. I thought that's all it was. The landscaping company lost its biggest client in March, a commercial property group that had been 40% of my father's annual revenue for 6 years. He told us about it at Sunday dinner in the same flat voice he used for weather reports, and I remember feeling genuinely bad for him, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. I didn't know yet that 2 weeks later, that lost contract would have my name attached to the solution. He showed up on a Tuesday evening, no call first, while Marcus and I were spread out on the living room floor comparing invitation samples. He set the manila envelope on the kitchen table between us and said, "We just need 20,000 out of the wedding account. It's temporary, Claire. I'll pay it back before the wedding, I promise you that." "Dad, that's most of our venue deposit protection," I said. "That's the caterer. You'll still have plenty," he said, waving a hand like the number was flexible. "You girls always over-budget these things anyway." Marcus set his coffee down. "No," he said again, quieter this time, but with a weight that made my father actually stop talking. "That money isn't available. Not for this." My father's jaw tightened in a way I recognized from childhood, the look right before he stopped asking and started assuming. "This isn't your money to decide on, son," he said, and the word son came out like a blade wrapped in politeness. "This is a family matter." "She's my fiancé," Marcus said. "That makes it my business, too." My father picked the envelope back up, tapped it once against his palm, and said something that would replay in my head for weeks. I already know how to make sure this isn't a problem, Claire. You know that. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. But the way he said it, calm, certain, like a man holding a card he hadn't shown me, told me this wasn't over. My mother called the next morning, her voice pitched soft and pleading in a way that felt rehearsed. Your father's under so much pressure, Claire. He's not sleeping. You know he'd never ask if it wasn't serious. I told her I understood the pressure, but that the money wasn't mine to give away unilaterally. It was Marcus's too. There was a pause on the line, and then she said, Marcus is being awfully controlling about a family situation that isn't his. That was the first time anyone in my family called my fiancé controlling for saying one word. The following week, my father tried a different angle. He showed up at my work, at the nursery where I still helped out part-time on Saturdays, and stood by my register while I finished with a customer. You know your grandmother helped me when I was starting the company, he said, once we were alone. Family helps family, Claire. That's how it's always worked in this family. I reminded him that family helping family had, so far, only ever flowed in one direction, toward him. He didn't have a response for that. He just picked up a small potted fern, turned it over in his hands, and said, I raised you better than to keep score. 3 days later, the pressure shifted to something colder. I got a text from my mother. Your father says if you two can't help now, when it matters, maybe we shouldn't be paying for the rehearsal dinner either. It wasn't a threat about money anymore. It was a threat about presence, about whether my parents would show up warm or show up resentful at the one event I couldn't redo. I sat in my car in the nursery parking lot and cried for the first time through the whole thing. Not from sadness exactly, but from the exhausting realization that my father had never once, in this entire exchange, asked how I was doing with any of it. Would you have handed over the money just to keep the peace before your own wedding? Or would you have held the line the way Marcus did? Tell me in the comments. I still don't know if I'd have been strong enough to say no on my own. That night, I couldn't stop replaying my father's line from the kitchen table. I already know how to make sure this isn't a problem. It nagged at me enough that I finally called our bank's fraud department the next morning, just to check the wedding account's authorized users, something Marcus and I had never bothered to review since opening it. The representative read off 2 names, mine, Marcus's, and a third I hadn't expected, Gerald Whitcomb. My father's name was on our wedding account. I sat with the phone against my ear for a full 10 seconds before I could ask how that was even possible. The representative explained that the account had been opened using an old power of attorney form on file with the bank from an account I'd held at 18, a form my father had me sign the summer before college, just in case something happens while you're away at school, he'd said at the time, sliding the paper across the table like it was routine. I hadn't thought about that signature in 11 years. He apparently never forgot it existed. I called Marcus at work, my hands shaking so badly I had to say it twice before he understood. He has authorization on our account, I said. He could have taken it without asking us at all. There was a long silence on the line before Marcus said, in a voice I'd never quite heard from him before, calm but sharpened into something decisive. He didn't do it yet. That means he wanted us to say yes first. He wanted it to look voluntary. That night, Marcus didn't get angry the way I expected. He got methodical. The same way he approached the wedding spreadsheet, quiet, thorough, unwilling to let a single detail slip through. He pulled up the bank's revocation process on his laptop, printed the forms, and set them on the counter next to a legal pad where he'd started writing dates. Every conversation, every visit, every dollar amount my father had mentioned since March, each one labeled with a small note in the margin. We're not doing this quietly, he said, sliding the pad toward me, tapping the top line where he'd written the date of the kitchen table conversation. If he wanted an audience for the ask, he's going to get one for the answer. I didn't know yet that the audience Marcus had in mind was going to be the entire rehearsal dinner. The rehearsal dinner was 2 Fridays later, at a restaurant with exposed brick walls and string lights, not unlike the ones we'd chosen for the barn, 40 of our closest family and friends packed around 2 long tables, the smell of garlic bread and candle wax thick in the air. He stood up early in the evening, glass in hand, ice clinking softly against the crystal, to give a toast about family sticking together no matter what, looking directly at me the way he had at the kitchen table weeks earlier. My mother squeezed his free hand, beaming, like the tension of the last month had simply evaporated into the warm restaurant air. Marcus stood up before my father could sit back down, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor loud enough that a few heads turned early. "Before we get to the toasts," Marcus said, his voice even, "I want to thank Gerald publicly for something." My father's smile flickered, uncertain, his glass still raised halfway. "For teaching me exactly how far some people will go to get what they want from family." A ripple of confused laughter moved through the room, the kind that happens when people aren't sure yet if a joke is coming. "Marcus," my father said. Low, not here. "You put yourself on our wedding account without telling either of us," Marcus said, still calm, still standing, using a form Claire signed when she was 18 years old. "You planned to use it if we said no." He set a folded copy of the revocation paperwork on the table next to the breadbasket. In full view of my aunt, my uncle, and my father's oldest friend from the landscaping business, a man named Walt, who'd known my dad for 20 years and had walked me down half the aisle rehearsal that very afternoon. The room went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when it realizes the toast has turned into something else entirely, forks pausing mid-air, someone's water glass sweating a ring onto the tablecloth. "That's not," my father started, but Walt cut in, low but audible. "Gerald, is that true?" And my father, standing in front of 40 people who had known him as a devoted, hard-working family man for decades, had no version of the story left that made him look good. My father didn't answer right away. He set his toast glass down slowly, and for a moment, something in his face cracked open. Not performance, not deflection, but something rawer. "The business is failing, Claire," he said, quieter now, only for the table nearest us to hear. I didn't know how else to ask. I've never had to ask anyone for anything in my life. His hand trembled slightly around the stem of the glass, and for one unguarded second, he looked less like the man who'd tapped that envelope against his palm and more like someone who'd spent 30 years terrified of exactly this, being small, being seen needing help. I almost stood up to comfort him. I almost forgot, for that 1 second, what he'd actually done. Then his eyes moved to Marcus, and the softness closed like a fist. "You didn't have to embarrass me in front of Walt," he said, voice hardening again. "This is between family. You're not even blood. I'm the one who noticed you never actually asked," Marcus said. "You just made sure you didn't have to." My mother reached for my father's arm, whispering something urgent, but it was too late to undo what 40 guests had already heard. Walt stood up from his seat, set his napkin on the table, and said plainly, "Gerald, I've loaned you money twice this year already. You told me the account access was your daughter's idea." The lie unraveled in real time, in front of the one man whose respect my father had spent 2 decades building outside our family. The next morning, after a full day of my father not answering his phone, the kind of silence that used to make me anxious and now just felt clean, almost peaceful in a way I didn't expect, Marcus and I met with the bank in person. We sat across from a branch manager named Doreen who reviewed the old power of attorney form with a kind of quiet disbelief, flipping it over to check the date twice. We formally revoked the access, closed the loophole for good, and I signed the paperwork myself this time, fully aware of exactly what I was putting my name on. It was the first document I'd ever signed in that family that felt like it actually protected me instead of quietly obligating me. Our wedding happened 3 weeks later, fully funded, exactly as planned, string lights and all. My father came. He sat in the second row, not the first, and he didn't give a toast. My mother cried during the vows, the good kind of crying, and afterward she hugged me and said quietly, "I should have said something sooner." I believed her. I'm still deciding what to do with that. Marcus and I still get calls from my father sometimes, always careful now, always asking instead of assuming. He hasn't tried anything like the account again, he can't, legally. But I think more than that, he finally understands that no isn't a door he gets to walk around anymore. I think about that manila envelope a lot, sitting on our kitchen table next to the invitation samples, and my father's voice saying, I already know how to make sure this isn't a problem. He was right, in a way, he did know how. He just didn't expect that the person standing between him and that problem would simply say no and mean it in front of everyone who mattered. If someone in your family has ever tried to make their emergency your obligation, tell me your story in the comments, and if this one hit close to home, subscribe for more.